Ibadoghlu and with the university, and of course to have such a prominent group of colleagues who joined this class. I'm representing more a political science part of this course, and I'll tell you a bit of my background and how I came to this topic. As you know, the post-Soviet states, they opened up to the foreign investments, including Azerbaijan. And in the 90s, throughout 90s, I was very actively involved in advising and consulting oil companies, major oil corporations, which were based in the country. And it, of course, brought me to a new experience. And new experience was, knowing how the oil corporations work in the countries with energy resources. I even was the advisor to UNICEF during this famous notorious pipeline project, which was going from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and further. And but the more you observe what's happening in the country, the more you start to realize that indeed the availability of the oil resources, it's not so straightforward. I mean, it is not necessarily the blessing. So it was quite empirical, the interest which was coming. I also was a national coordinator of a human development report of UNDP in '96, where we already put the question of what is the influence of the oil resources on the political system, on the development of the major development indicators and civil society, for instance. So that was the first public report where we tried to see the effect of the oil resources on the social, economic, and political structures. But then gradually, you start to realize that actually it's a very deep mechanism of which prevents the country from making a breakthrough in development of all these structures which I just mentioned. And what is this mechanism? One of the ways, or one of the theoretical framework which tries to explain mainly three major questions. Why the oil-driven states, economies, are not the fastest growing economies. Second, why there is, in some of them or in many of them, you have a high level of inequality, poverty, the most important. And the third one, while most of them are tending to be authoritarian states with extremely centralized structure. So today we will speak about rentier states theories. And rentier states, if you look at this picture, and the picture is basically only one region, covering only one region, which rentier states theory cover. It's the Arab states, and I think the literature which I sort of left you in the folder is also about Arab states. If you look at them, you will see there are four oil-rich states, and they look very similar. I mean, those who visited those states probably can identify them. but they're extremely similar. And it says a lot about the nature of economy and nature of state. It says about modernization, but rather a very peculiar type of modernization, rather a shallow modernization. It also says about the essence of power. The architecture tells you about the essence of power. You know, these oil-rich states usually compete who will build the highest tower. And one of them, as you know, so there are four capitals here. One is Abu Dhabi, Doha, Dubai, and Kuwait City. By the way, the St. Andrews University started a very interesting project on how architecture reflects the peculiarities of the oil-rich states. That might be one of the topics which you might get interested in. We will start with definitions. They will move to characteristics or indicators of the rentier states. We will overview types. Then we'll speak about implications. So rentier state theories is a political economy theory which seeks to explain state-society relations in states that generate a large proportion of their income from externally derived, unproductively earned payments. That's the sort of quite popular definition by Gray. But the rent is not something new. The concept of rent was used and is very often quoted by Adam Smith in his famous book in 1776, 18th century, where he says that rents are different from earned income. Basically, income which is earned with hard labor is one thing, and rent is something else. Moreover, in early 20th century Europe, the concept of rent was used for the very popular theories of rentier capitalism, where the fact that European states were giving loans to the non-developed states was used for description of imperialism, form of imperialism, just making them dependent on the European states. But the rentier states theory, in a sense which we are going to discuss and which is used and widely spread today to describe the developments in the oil-rich states were laid, the foundation of that theory was laid by Hussein Mahdavi. In 1965, he developed a modern concept of rentier state on the case study of Iranian economy and Iranian politics. We will move then to the revival of this theory again in the 80s by Beblavi and Luciani. They took on this theory by Hussein Mahdavi and adjusted them to the Arab states, the cases of Arab states. Then later in the 90s, the rentier states theory was applied to sub-Saharan Africa and then to Latin America. In the end, we will also touch on post-Soviet rentier states, which the many authors in this area, they argue that this is a specific category of the rentier states. Okay, so as I already mentioned, rents, they differ from wages, which are labored for. It's an income based on ownership of land resources. And as Ricardo used to say, the rent is effect, never cause of high value of product. Income derived from the gift of nature. That's another definition of rent by Marshall in 1920. But it also, one should not confuse it, the term of rents in Rentier in economy and social science. In social science, it acquired some sort of negative connotation because rentierism was in sharp contrast with the entrepreneur who was sort of dynamic, innovative, and highly productive, while Rentier is getting his income in a non-productive way. So when we start seeing what has Mahdavi done, so he gave basically three major concepts. Rentier states are those who received on a regular basis substantial amount of external rate. We will see that after a while, the rentier state theory will be developed. As all the theories, rentier state theory also didn't just stop at one point. It was developing and it was critically assessed and reviewed. So that point of external rent by now is already reviewed and critically assessed. And it's their authors, when we come to them, they say it's not just external, but also internal rents. External rents, these are rentals paid by individual concern or governments to individual concerns or governments of the given country. All revenues have nothing to do with the domestic economy. That's very important, because that explains this connection between, and the question which Mahdavi was asking, why the oil-rich countries are not the countries with the fastest growing economy. And he demonstrates on the, not this one, on this little table to show that there is no effect whatsoever or connection between the domestic economy and external rent. Look, for instance, he shows you the Iran's oil production and compares in 10 years. We see it more than 2 times increase. And the local expenditure, which includes wages, salaries, payments to local contractors, purchase of local supplies, are actually decreasing. The same thing, almost the same dependence correlation is in the Middle East, 3 times increase of production, and look how little it affected the local economies. We will, I will take you back to the idea about rentier states and rentier state theories and the regions, which I just mentioned, by showing you this table or graph of oil-dependent economies, states, and you can see that the first 10 of them, they comprise all 3 regions, basically. It's Latin America, or 4 regions. Latin America, Arab states, it's sub-Saharan Africa, and it's post-Soviet states. Azerbaijan is included. And there are usually 2 major indicators for oil dependence. It's the exports, the energy shares in export, and energy shares in GDP. So the next is the share of GDP of the oil. And you can see that, again, there is big countries, which most of which are sort of included in this chart as well. As I said, Mahdavi was asking question why the inflow of oil resources did not lead to fastest growing economy. And he comes with the idea that the weight of external rents, the percentage of oil revenues, of total government revenues of foreign exchange earnings, play a key role. What were the major changes which led to this emergence of the rentier state? Well, in 1950-56, he argues, there was nationalization of oil in Iran and also nationalization of Suez Canal. Governments appropriated large shares of rents which were previously accrued to the oil companies. So governments and state become a major actor in economy. Oil resources allow the government to run large public expenditure programs without resorting to taxation. They don't need to tax society anymore. The government, as I said, becomes an important factor of economy, and relations of the oil industry with local economy is realized via expenditure, which he argues is not enough to stimulate growth. So most importantly, the oil resources accrued directly to state removes urgency of development. How do I move it? Okay. So what is important? What is important is a reaction or response from the rest of the economy. So whether this rent is used for productive or non-productive labor, whether it's used for import of consumption only, then it doesn't touch the rest of the economy. As a result of these rents, it creates a dangerous situation when there is a imitation of prosperity by public expenditure projects in a few cities, which masquerades the true situation of economy. And you know, Iran at that point was not the prosperous country like the same way as the Arab states later. So there was a quite serious, large section of society in poverty. Education was underfunded. Mahdavi says that in those years, the education of Iran did not even reach the education of Japan 1 century of the 19th century. So in spite of this beautiful performing effect of the big expenditure projects, there was a technological and economic backwardness. So he concludes that per capita income is not an indicator of assessment of development performance of the countries. For instance, he was saying Kuwait had the highest income per capita, but it is behind many other accounts, on many other accounts. Let me show you the graphs, quite old tables, which he used to demonstrate the effect of oil. So you can see, he considers that there are two periods in Iranian oil development, in the Iranian development of state, role of state. He says that one basically normal dependence is seen on before 50s, particularly 55. It's one period, and the other period is a very sharp increase of oil revenues of Iranian government. And he says that's where the problem starts. when before this revenue was going to the oil companies, but after nationalization, the government becomes in control, and this windfall, I think, of of the oil revenues comes to the accrues directly to Iranian government. And then the second quite interesting slide, which shows the other quite typical dynamic in the oil-rich states and rentier effect. It's when import value starts at the same 55, look at the number, the 55, it starts, the import tremendously grows, and grows much quicker, first of all, than before, as compared to exports value. That's what we see actually in most of the oil-rich states. And these seem to be an objective mechanism or dependence, which Mahdavi noticed and observed in his analysis. So the revision of the theory or revival of the theory was in connection with the boom of the 70s in the Middle East. And the authors of this revived theory of rentier states, Gubad and Luciani, they explained that the events in the Middle East at that time, creation of OPEC, Arab oil embargo, fall of Shah of Iran, it pushed 10 times rise of oil prices. So it was $3 in the 70s to 35 in the 80s. So this push of the oil prices caused the oil revenue windfall, which in turn caused a need to categorize the effect which oil had on the role of state and economic behavior. So rentier economy, they say, is where there are four major indicators of rentier economy. It's where the rent situations predominate. So basically there are no pure rents or rentier economy because every economy has an element of rent, of elements of rentier economy. The economy should rely on substantial external rents to be called the rentier state, and only a few are engaged in generation of rents or wealth, while majority are just waiting for distribution or utilization. The government is the principal recipient of rents. So these are the major indicators. And at the same time, they were speaking about the impact of rentier economy, which had both on rentier mentality, rentier rentier social effect, and also the effect on the role of state in the Arab world. So rentier economy, they say, leads to rentier mentality. And it's because of the break within work-reward connection. Reward is not related to work, but to a chance. This reward, rent, is not related to a work, but it is related to a chance or an opportunity. So prevalence of rentier economy, they argue, affects role of state in the Arab world. So that gives rise to the rentier states, which are depending on external rents. Oil revenues constitute 90% of a budget and 95% of experts. Only 2 or 3% are involved in production of rent. And oil revenues accrue directly to the state government. State is a principal actor who distributes rent among population. Here we come to one of the major things which made me involved in this topic in time, its connection with a democracy. It goes through this cut of the connections between state and populace. State or government exists by definition, should exist at the expense of the taxation. Here we have the state, or those who represent the state, elite, which is not dependent on the populace because it doesn't need taxation. It gets a lot of resources external at the expense of the external rents. So this is the famous expression, no taxation, no representation, explains the connection of the rentier states and democracy, or let's say the absence of democracy, because that turns into it deprives the government or state of the incentive to be accountable for the populace. And on the other hand, people become less demanding for political participation. So it's a sort of double-edged sort of phenomenon. Budget turns into an expenditure program. You probably read that, which I left in the folder. Well, he brings the example of Kuwait. There was usually Kuwait, for instance, improved health and education programs, but unfortunately, government contracts are still being royal favors. So there is no such a thing as rule of law in a liberal understanding. But they're free. Those who control rents, they're free in distributing or direct the expenditure programs in the way which would support status quo, or the political power. The other effect is that in the rentier states, the public service and private interest become really merged. So as usual, there is no working in practice provision of conflict of interest. For instance, in Azerbaijan, but our Professor Ibadoghlu probably will speak about that most probably in details. The conflict of interest is on paper, but in practice it doesn't work. And also, government is a major employer of the country. So it leads to a bloated bureaucracy sector or government sector, because everyone basically wants to work for the government because it's the only place where you have some sort of security. And besides that, you have also access to the resources. So other actors, business and merchants, they benefit from laws favoring nationals as compared to foreigners. And that's the another mechanism which Beblavi brings as the mechanism of the rentier state. For instance, when the Arab states adopt the laws which require you have a national of that country as a mediator, as an agent, So that also creates additional opportunities for rents through the government manipulation of regulation, right? And you probably read about this al-kafil category of agents in the Arab states. Let me just, is it the last one or there is still?
Yes, this is last one. I will upload the other one, but it takes a bit time. So if you want to have a small break, or if you want to continue, like
yeah,
take a bit time.
Yeah, I think you might guys maybe have some comments or something else, if you have any. But we'll have to make a little break because the second part is just coming. Did you find the reading difficult, or it was okay? Don't see them. If somebody wants to speak, can open, unmute the microphone.
Actually, it was very interesting to know about like the entire states and general. I didn't never heard about this.
Yes, Rentier states is quite popular, yeah, and very popular framework for explaining the resource curse and the effect which oil resources have on the economic, political, and social structure. And via, yes, we have Gubad base here.
Yes, I am here.
Yes, maybe Gubad can contribute somehow while we are waiting for the second part.
Thank you so much, Leila, for your excellent presentation. I want to say that there is the direct link between the rentier state and the political governance of the countries. The empiric study shows that in rich resource countries, we have almost authoritarian countries, except of the Norway. Norway is a different example, but most scholar argues that why Norway except because the democratic institution developed in Norway before discovered the oil and the gas reserves. And when the oil and the gas reserves discovered in other countries, and then country turn of the rentier state, in this case, the oil hindering the establishment and the democratic institution.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you so much for your clarification and specification. And it seems our second part is ready. So I would attract your attention to the classification by Beblavi of rentier states in two categories. Now he speaks about two types of rentier states. One is first grade or full rentier state. It's when it has its rents or income from the external oil revenues, and the other kind of although this is not the table which I'm showing it now, it will be the next, but the second degree rentier states or semi-rentier states are those whose substantial external rents are coming from either remittances or foreign aid. But this will be particularly developed in the next stage of the rentier state theory. We will come to that later. So Beblavi continued his argument that the government manipulation by the regulations, it's second order rents. For instance, the real estate and stock market speculation, land speculation. So domestically, the government starts to also reproduce the logic of rents. So instead of investing in the productive sector or real sector of economy, it gets involved in more reproduction of the rentier-based economies or schemes. So basically, the rentier state is hierarchy of the various rentier, of the levels of various rentier relationship, rather than development of the real sector of economy. And that's all because of the rentier mentality. That's because of the connection which develops between the rent and the state and the role which state starts to play. So there are two juxtapositions of rentier economy and productive economy, which we said are not related, and very often rentier economy actually create disincentives to productive economy. And also in the Arab states, there is a juxtaposition between the foreigners, foreign labor, and nationals. Nationals usually are involved in rentier economy, while foreigners in productive activities. But it's not everywhere. For instance, in post-Soviet state, it's a bit weaker expressed, and we'll come to that probably in our future lectures. So, as I said, there are semi-rentier states too, and they display the same signs of rentier behavior, but they are called location rents. For instance, some countries receive huge aid per capita exactly because they're located in strategically important places. For instance, he brings the example of Egypt, which was getting enormous aid from the Soviet Union, and not because of the oil or not because of something else, but only because of the strategic location. And then after that, Egypt was getting the highest per capita aid from the United States, among other countries there. So the other countries get their rents for being the transit states. And I already mentioned work remittances and the other mechanisms like subsidies, for instance, or welfare doctrines. Okay, then we come to the next stage of development of rentier states. So Luciani suggests the other typology of states. Not rentier and semi-rentier, but allocation and production state, depending on the role and function of state. He says, what does the nature of state income affect? First of all, survival of state. There were many weak countries, Arab states, which were created in the colonial period. And probably most of them would not survive, if not their oil revenues. It also affects the degree of centralization and trend to authoritarian rule. the state income, the rent, the nature of the state income, as well as basic rules of political life in the country. So he makes rather direct connection of the rentier state to the political shape of that state, the rentier economy and political shape. He, however, says that rentier states are not necessarily oil exporting countries. Some important flows of income with rent component does not accrue directly to the state. So he's critically revising the previous assumptions by Mahdavi on the example of Iran. But he says, yeah, that it's essential that the rent is earned abroad. We will see that even this provision will be reviewed in the 2010s by other authors. So he says that the source of rent is important, not the nature. Export is important more than production, so it frees the state from raising income domestically. And he calls that state exoteric, based on the external revenue which accrues directly to state, and esoteric, based on domestic revenue and taxation. And he basically concludes that there might be, depending on the function of state, there might be two kinds of state. Rentier, allocation state. The function of the state is just allocating the income it gets from the rest of the world, and strengthening of economy is not necessary for existence and expansion of the state. Production state's income is based on domestic income, real state of economy, and taxes. He considers that these categories, allocation state, which basically gets the rents and allocates usually through expenditure programs, and versus production state, which is based on taxation, which is based on the real sector of economy. He considers that this can be a good tool which can be applied throughout Arab world, but also beyond oil. Now we could come to the third stage of the development of the rentier state theory. Adil Malik from Oxford in 2017 wrote the article Rethinking the Rentier State Theory. And his major argument is that we should look broader to the effect of rents beyond oil, because very similar behavior and development are displayed in the other states, which do not own huge resources. So he considers that rents include foreign aid, remittances, and also government manipulation of the economy, reliance on which also leads to underdevelopment. Many ills of the region, bloated state, unemployment, weak structure, weak private sector, limited political education, their evolution, they are all rooted in economic structure which is heavily reliant on external windfalls, whether derived from oil, aid, or remittances. Regulatory rents also are including them. They result from market subversion, and they're particularly important. So he concludes that Middle East resource curves can simply be viewed as part of broader rent curves. So major revisions of his approach is that oil revenues are complemented by rents from aid, remittances and government regulations, rents which are not externally generated only lead to the rentier state. They're domestically generated too, which is quite a departure from the previous classics of the rentier state theory. So, for instance, the restrictive policies applied to privilege business connected to regime. So the whole legislation is adopted or modified to favor interest of the regime or the elite which owns resources. And the recycle external rents, they're not used only to buy local loyalties, because that's what happens when the government gets the revenues, huge revenues. Instead of being dependent on the society through taxation, they actually buy society. They buy society by the expenditure programs, welfare programs, by selective distribution of these rents according to their political interests. So it's one-way connection when the state or government is buying off political support. So Malik says it's not just domestic, it's also external. They buy loyalty also abroad. And I think Professor Ibadoghlu has an excellent knowledge of that part also, and he will tell you in details about that in the following lectures. Here, Malik says that in spite of the fact that there are 3 types of various economies in Middle East and North Africa region, all of them display the features of the rentier states. These are not identical economies. They all have different degrees of natural resources, of the real state of economy. But for instance, he speaks about 3 types of economy: capital surplus, oil exporting, those who use rents to provide generous welfare, and that went to that led to rapid absorption of oil rents through government consumption, led to stable autocracies, labor market distortions, patronage, and high dependence on resource rents. The second type of countries are capital deficient and labor abundant. So they have modest resource rents per capita, let's say under 40% of GNP, and deployed rents to start industrialization, but they failed. Oil rents are and they failed in spite of the fact that oil rents are not dominating the GDP or export, but they failed because they're combined with regulatory rents, which we just spoke about, that the rents which are derived through manipulation of economy, which leads to rent seeking, weak private sector, and greater resistance to reforms. And at last, we have resource poor countries, but which has another source of rents. It's foreign aid and worker remittances, as well as regulations. So Morocco, Tunisia, Jordan do not have large energy resources. They're open to liberalization and reforms, but enough not to disrupt status quo. Still, all the reforms and political opening is limited, exactly because they have the phenomenon of the rentier state. So in the second oil boom, there was already innovation to prevent the rentier state effect. And that was the creation of the sovereign wealth funds. But in fact, it didn't change the rent-dependent model of development, the creation of the sovereign funds, because there was the other effect, which made the institutions of checks and balances very weak, which made the process non-transparent, because these sovereign wealth funds, which you see two oil booms, 1970s and 1990s, and that's when the sovereign wealth funds were being created. So these sovereign wealth funds, they were not created along with the political institutions, which would provide transparency and accountability and other things. So they didn't change substantially, but you may have different information, and I'll be happy to hear your impression also. Public expenditures accelerated, that's another effect which it had. And in spite of some diversification, sovereign wealth funds continue to be directed to the white elephant projects. I don't know if you know the experience. White elephant project, it's the very glossy, big, expensive projects, but with a little meaning for the economy. It's more for demonstration effects. The non-oil rents, Malika argues, mimic the oil rents and shape adverse political economy. So he considers that foreign aid is a geopolitical rent which can replicate the resource curse symptoms. So, as I said, he basically, this is more or less the conclusion, that internal authoritarian structures are enhanced both by external and internal rents. Aid and remittances play a significant role in major Arab states, from Lebanon to Egypt, and internal rents are generated through government manipulation of economy, connecting the business class to political order, and that's where the two come together, the government and business. And very often the country is run as a big business. And there was actually a very good article by, don't remember now, but it was about whether the Azerbaijan is run as a state oil company. So it's very hard, he continues. So this little graph shows that the connection between the oil price and remittances. What he says that everything is connected in the region. And remittances also, if you look at this graph of the oil price and the remittances, they're more or less relevant to the fluctuations of the oil price. So it shows how interconnected are rents in the region. And a region more or less is driven by the very similar trends. So as I said, we will probably close soon because we will need time for discussions. As I said, in the 90s, the Rentier state theory was extrapolated or applied to Africa and then later to South America. Each region has its own profound effects of the rentier states. Africa, for instance, is distinguished by the high level of poverty and inequality. If you look at the dependence, oil dependence, you will see Sudan, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, and basically Congo, Brazil. And then if we look to the, we'll look at the level of inequality, the Gini coefficient is enormous. Particularly look at Gabon, it's huge, and Angola. So poverty is practically the characteristic of every African country. In South America, the three countries which can be called rentier states based on the oil revenues, the energy dependence, are Venezuela, Bolivia, and Ecuador. And if you look at the percentage of exports, Venezuela, which is usually on the top pages due to the persistence of the regime, instability, the social issues, particularly the scholars are now interested in how the rents are affecting the oil rents, how they affecting the foreign policy or nationalism of Venezuelan leader. Chavez, as you know, has shown quite prominent nationalist behavior in the last few years, and some authors find a direct correlation between the oil price and amount of rent which Venezuela achieves, a direct correlation between these factors and the nationalism which is exposed by Venezuela leaders. We are coming to the conclusion of our review to the very specific category of rentier states, so-called post-Soviet rentier states. Why is it specific? Because it combines two structural peculiarities. One of them is the Soviet legacies, institutional legacies, right? After 70 years of totalitarian regime, authoritarian state, you have quite serious legacies, institutional legacies, in the form of centralized government, underdeveloped institutions of checks and balances and others. And also the effect of the rentier economy. So it's a double curse, what Anya Franke with her co-authors calls the double curse: resource income and autocracy. So these post-Soviet oil-rich states, they're all categorized by, they combine large resources, low diversification of economy, autocratic presidentialism, neo-patrimonial structures, lack of political interest of society, which led to specific post-Soviet variety of rentierism. And for instance, Franke compares Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, finds a lot in common. She considers the main Soviet legacy neo-patrimonialism. So it's basically a vertical and horizontal network of connections of personal and bureaucratic relations. So it's basically a merger, bureaucratic and personal relations. And that directs the distribution of rents. So it's not the rents only strengthen the patronage system and the let me show you the next one. Okay, so it's very provisional sort of table, but you can see that it's not just Central Asian states. Russia also displays the characteristics of the rentier states, but we can speak about it in the other lectures and seminars. So you can see that they share quite a high share of GDP and share in experts. Azerbaijan here is a record high, 95 share of experts. We don't have Uzbekistan here, which would be quite, prominent too. The major structural or institutional similarities between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan is that elite has almost absolute power in oil and gas contracts. Or parliament doesn't have a force. Civil society is very weak. Political opposition doesn't have any effect. So all the institutions are more or less neutralized. And that's why elite, which represents the state or the government, they have the control over the oil and gas contracts. They have permanent corrupt and rent-seeking elite, and they get support through rent allocation. In the society, they distribute the rent in a way that will strengthen their own power. The other, from my point of view, it's very interesting why in the Soviet states, post-Soviet states, there is lack of concern with the distribution of welfare. I think Professor Ibadoghlu can also kind of comment on that. Because in principle, we are coming from the welfare states, right? The state was distributing resources among population in a sort of relatively equal manner. So there should be some consistency, yes, if we have these legacies, but there is lack of concern with distribution of welfare. And of course, and distribution of rents is non-transparent. So conclusions of on this particular type of rentier states is that rentierism and Soviet legacies, they enhance each other. Autocratic and neo-patrimonial regimes strengthen rentierism. And there is a high level of oil revenues which make autocratic power more stable. So here I would like to stop. We may take questions, or if there are no questions, we can move to the practical part of our sort of seminar. So what do you think? Okay, so
Saswati included the question in the chat box.
yes, I see it. I see it. Let me see. Okay. Yes. The mineral resource countries, well, there is a difference which was explained last time, I think, by Professor Ibadoghlu. He was speaking about difference between the oil and gas resources and other mining industries. The authors bring the example of the gold in Spain a few centuries ago, which had a very similar effect. Professor Ibadoghlu, would you like to comment on because I think it's related to your last, your lecture topic. Would you like to comment on that, the first part of this? No? I don't hear. Hello? No, apparently you don't have anything, right? Okay, so I don't understand. Yeah? Hello?
It was just unmute. I want to say that last time we discussed the differences between the mineral and the mining sector and the hydrocarbon sector. I explain the main differences in the context of the legal regime. Most of the hydrocarbon sector based on the production sharing agreement. They involve the companies for the exploration with certain share, and the government also distribute the profit oil between state and the companies. But most of the mining sector, the legal regime based on the concession agreement, and it's impossible to find the production sharing agreement in the mining sector. In the investment context, the hydrocarbon sector require more investment because they require more modern technology. They require additional also construction of the pipeline, because the mining sector is not necessary the pipeline. You can send your the minerals by the railroad, but in the hydrocarbon sector, it's totally different infrastructure, modern technology, and plus the pipeline, and also require the additional investment for the sending the oil and the gas products to the world market. And another the difference is the mining sector, you can explore in the small scale and artisan field, but in hydrocarbon sector is totally different. It's big fields, most time the offshore, and sometime in the also onshore. And this, I mean, it's the main differences between the mining sector and the hydrocarbon sector. Three main differences.
Hello. Sorry, my question was basically around the rentier economy. We heard about how the rentier economy is largely in the oil and gas resource countries. So I wanted to ask, is it also applicable to countries where there are like mineral resources and not really oil and gas? I wasn't kind of, I mean, I know the basic difference between the oil and gas and mineral resources, but the concept on the rentier economy, maybe I might not sound okay with that, because, yeah.
It's applicable. It's the same situation. If, for example, the Chile, one of the strong dependence economy from the minerals, also we can call these countries like the Rentier state, but it's applicable if the country receive more revenue from the mining sector, also country became the Rentier state. even country receive more revenue from transition income from the transportation of the oil and the gas. For example, the Belarus also we can call as a rentier state. Is it correct, Leila Hanım?
Yeah, yeah. Case of Belarus is special because rents are coming from the cheap energy resources arriving from Russia and then sold in the other countries. So that's where the rent comes from, and also through distribution in the country, practically for free. So it's a very sort of peculiar, that's why rentier state theory is quite broad, because it may include other countries. You just need the definition, the understanding. What's it's non-productive income, basically. It's non-productive income. Is the mineral resources, are the mineral resources and rent from it? If there are a few mineral, I think mining and mineral, other mineral resources involve much greater labor force in production of that. So it's a productive labor in a sense, which is involved, human labor in the mining resources than, for instance, oil and gas. I mean, we need to look at the, first of all, whether it's productive or non-productive sector, and whether this income is constituting the majority, is predominant in your GDP or export sort of value.
As well as the budget revenue. As well as the budget revenue. If the budget strongly depend on the rent, it doesn't matter rent coming from oil and the gas sector or mining sector or transportation of the oil and the gas and other resources through the country. If the share of the rent high in the budget revenue, we can present this country like the rentier state.
There were many other questions. One of them was also, Svetlana asked about how it's different from the concept of shared inheritance of future generations fund. The thing is that I gave you just the basic idea, but the specificities of the mechanism of how it works in practice will come up in the other lectures, in the specific case studies, which will work, because it's a broader context. For instance, as I said, Future Generation Fund, the difference is that Future Generation Fund was created in Norway, while Sovereign Wealth Fund was created in Arab states. And the conditions, political conditions, are totally different, because in Norway, this fund exists in the well-developed system of the institutions of checks and balances. And it's impossible to monopolize this fund and to make arbitrary decisions. It's not possible to get the control of this fund by the side of the small group of elite and use it arbitrarily for the sort of sake of, strengthening your political regime or political power. In Arab states, these sovereign wealth funds come in the country where there are no political institutions, which would provide for the accountability, which would provide for checks and balances, which would balance the power of the royalty or the state. Well, in our report in 1995, which I led as a national coordinator of the Human Development Report, the first thing which was observable already in the by 95 is a huge asymmetry between the state and society, state and the societal formations. because state was tremendously empowered and strengthened by the enormous investments, bonuses coming from the oil company, while the civil society was not getting anything. There was no distribution which would empower the civil society. So one of the, for instance, structural imbalances is this huge discrepancy, and that's why the wealth funds in Arab states cannot basically break through this chain of the institutional stagnation. That's why they can't go out of it. I'll give you another example. As one of the leaders of the Green movement back home, when we just opened the doors to the oil companies, oil corporations, the Greens had the very convincing concept of freezing the oil resources for the future generations and develop instead the valuable fishery and similar industries. But of course, there was so much pressure from the international corporations and also the interest from the domestic elite, because this is a serious strategic asset. It's a serious strategic asset. So there are many sort of trade-offs and obstacles to the things which you can. Good question, Charlie, about Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste is a special case, of course. It has a lot of intricacies and nuances. And of course, they are rentier states. They are rentier states, but the framework of I hope very much that you will contribute to this today's lecture by bringing, because I will show you the question which I have, and I'm afraid we have to move to further. Resource curse state, Jokai, the rentier state and resource curse state. Resource curse is one type, a type, or rentier state is a broader category. So resource curse is part of it, specifically, which is related to the oil and gas resources. Not the ones, as we mentioned, remittances or foreign aid or other sources of rents. Would like to highly mechanism will be considered rent. Agriculture is productive sector of economy, so you can't consider it. I don't think. I don't consider it's. I don't consider it's rent. It's a productive sector of economy. Yes, do you agree, Dr. Ibadoghlu, that large-scale, highly mechanized agriculture can be, with few workers, considered to be rent? But it's not great.
Yeah, I am completely agree. And one of the main the goals of the management of oil and the gas revenue in the research-rich countries, diversify of the economy. That's why, in the context of the agriculture, it makes sense to invest money in the countries where they have the really good the agriculture and the other manufacturing sector for the development of the non-oil and the gas sector.
I would like to go to the discussion. We don't have much time, I'm afraid, right? How much time, Hazal, do we have? Is Hazal here? Maybe not.
Here.
Yeah, how much time do we have for discussion?
I am not sure. Is it 2 hours?
Oh, okay. So we
I don't know.
still have, yeah?
Yes, if it's 2 hours, yes, half an hour.
Okay, good. So we're now coming to the practical part. And I have a question for you. Which of the approaches or types of the rentier states best describe the case or state you are from? It's probably yokai. It's particular to you, or you're familiar with. For instance, and I give you a few options: rentier state or semi-rentier state, allocation or production state, non-oil-based rentier state, or post-Soviet rentier state. If you could just explain if you consider that this category describe best the case of your country or the country you studied or your country you know of, that will be good. And let me divide you into groups. Now I need to find out how to do it again. Choosers, oops, groups. Okay, create breakout rooms. How many of us are not? 10, right? So 5, duration 15. Maybe we should give 20 minutes. Last time it was not enough. What do you think? 20 minutes. Randomly assign 1 and 2. Did you guys get to the rooms? Yeah. Great. And we started, right? So we will assemble back in a minute.
So, Leila, now everyone in your group, so they cannot hear you from here. You need to join in one of the group, maybe.
Maybe you could just announce that they will have 20 minutes to discuss.
Okay. Okay. Yes, I will do.
Yeah, thank you. Gubad Bey, do you hear me? Gubad Bey.
Yes.
Gubad Bey, bir bakın zahmet olmasa, there is, I think I missed the question by Sumaya Sediki. Approach for estimating the regulatory rent. I'm not sure I understand the question. Maybe she meant measuring, how to measure it or estimate it.
Which question, Leila Hanım?
Sumaya Sediki.
Sumaya. Is there any approach for estimating the regulatory rent, for example, in the yeah, she means the measuring the regulatory rent.
Measuring, Do you know how to measure?
Inside of the budget revenue, you can divide it, the incomes into different group, and if income coming from for example, oil sector, non-gas sector, it's not including the rentier revenue. But if income coming directly, for example, transfer from the SOFAs to the state budget, and the transfer from the BP and other companies to the state budget should include the rentier revenue.
Onda Gubad Bey izah eləyərsiniz də, cavab verərsiniz o çıxanda. Mən yadımdan çıxartdım o sualı. I overlooked that question. I think the rest we more or less answered.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello, Hassel, how would you know that the time has gone? It shows, right?
They can see, and also if you click on the breakout rooms at the left side, it's right duration, for example, now 15:58. Can you see? I still have time 15 minutes 47.
I think I pushed something else. I have empty rooms. I have empty rooms, so I have to. What did I push? I'm afraid something wrong.
No, I don't think so.
It's. Is anyone from the first group ready?
Yeah, I can share. I don't know if we were group 1 or 2, but I'll just read the notes that we made. There were 4 of us in the group. I've worked and lived in Timor-Leste for a long time, and Timor-Leste is a rentier state, but our situation is not exactly the same as the countries that were described, because we basically had awareness when we created our sovereign wealth fund and our legal system. We were aware of a lot of the problems that were talked about and tried to take steps to prevent them, some of which worked, some of which didn't. Senur is from Turkey, and she said that Turkey is in transformation. Autocracy is increasing, and they have strong taxation system. Everybody has to pay taxes. Saswati is from India, and she described India as an allocation production state. We may not come under the rentier state, as we have a taxation system and largely depend on local production. We are politically engaged and are able to demand for transparency and accountability, even though the space is shrinking fast. And Lala is from Azerbaijan, and she said, we are a rentier state, which has huge amount of oil and gas, which is also exported to other countries. A non-oil based rentier state, in my opinion, is a state with external economic policy, which is closed for import and export of goods such as South Korea. So those were the 4 of us in our group.
Oh, fantastic. That's good. We can elaborate on that after, but now let's give the floor to the second group. And who will speak on the second group? Do we have second group?
Well, yes, we do. But
Good.
just Gary, who's going to speak?
Okay.
Seems like maybe, yeah, I will try. So we only have 3 people. So I'm from Burma, and then we have Sumya from Iran, and we have Kore from Iraq.
From where?
From Turkey. Kore is from Turkey.
From Turkey. What is this?
Turkey.
Ah, Turkey. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I can start from Turkey. Turkey, he said the government is on a lot of salaries and production. So Turkey doesn't have mineral resources. And then Iran has more, yeah, for Turkey, so he doesn't really, it's not a rentier state, but he doesn't ensure there is allocation of production state or what kind of state is Turkey built. And then Iran is basically it's a rentier state, a lot of oil and gas. And Burma, we have also oil and gas, a lot of natural resources. So pretty much depend on the the gas export revenue and also foreign aid. So we say Burma is a rentier state.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So we have quite a wide variety of rentier states here, except for Turkey, right? And which else was not? India, Turkey. This seems to be quite convincing, that your analysis that they have the features of the rentier states. Before we move further, I wanted to ask, I think one of you, Somaya, I think asked the question, which I noticed quite late. It's about the approach which allows to determine what I think is the governmental rent, in a regulatory rent, sorry, in the GNP, right? I think you actually meant how can one measure, right? And Professor Ibadoghlu just mentioned that one of the way to measure it is to see what is the exact contribution of each sectors, but probably Professor Ibadoghlu can tell it in more details. Could you please elaborate on that a bit more, Professor Ibadoghlu? How can one measure the regulatory rent in?
Thank you. This question coming from, let me check one more time.
Somaya.
Somaya, thank you so much, Somaya, for your excellent questions. And we are going to talk about how the measuring the regulatory rent. But I want to say in generally, if we take the budget, as you know, the budget divided into two parts, expenditure and the revenue part. If revenue part, we can also divide it into two groups, and one of resources rent revenues and another one non-resources rent revenues. In this case, we can calculate how many revenues are coming from the resource, but it's also divided into two groups, the non-direct payment and the direct payment. Most countries, for example, the countries who is also operated the wealth fund, they transfer every year money from the oil and the gas wealth fund to the state budget. For example, in the Kazakhstan, in Azerbaijan, every year there is the transfer from the state oil fund to the state budget. It is including the direct payment, direct rentier payment. Additionally, there is also another payment coming from the companies which are operated in the country. They also paid some taxes from the operation and exploration in the oil and the gas field. For example, in Azerbaijan, the BP paid profit tax. but also it's including the rentier revenues. Plus BP paid some royalty, and the state oil fund also paid the royalty to the state budget. All of them are including the rentier payment to the state budget. Our calculation based on the company's payment and also state oil or gas fund transfer to the state budget.
Thank you so much. I think we can probably this issue will be clarified more with the development of the lectures. And I also wanted to tell you that I forgot to greet you from the room, which is named after Mikhail Khodorkovsky in St. Anthony's College in Oxford. They did it to to honor the oil businessman and opposition leader. So they gave a name to the meeting hall where I'm talking from, which is in a very good spirit, relevant spirit to our consortium of the scholars in exile. I also wanted to tell you that you already have to think about the topics of your essays, which you will have to submit by the end of the our course. Professor Ibadoghlu, I think if you start to think about what do you think for the next lecture or the other, or 2 more weeks, to give 2 more weeks to think about the topics of the essays. So you should keep it in mind that we will need it. What else? Thank you very much. It seems that you understood quite well the concept based on your replies. And I promise we'll speak more in details about this in our future lectures. If you have any questions or something was left unclear, you can always contact us via this system. Send a message, or just contact us. And you don't forget to check your folders where you have the literature for the next week and the presentations. Please upload them when you want. So I wanted to thank you very much for your very interesting contributions, for your participation. It was a great pleasure. Thank you, Professor Ibadoghlu, for your very valuable contribution, and Hazal, of course, for your such a important guidance us in this process. So have a good week. Yes, and hope to see you soon.
Leila, thank you so much. I just want to remind to everyone something about the time issue. So there is some sort of difference next week because USA, so Eastern time zone, don't change winter term next week, but in Europe it will change. So only for next week in Eastern time zone, there will be 1 hour, the class will start 1 hour late. So it's going to be same time zone, like 3 in sets and 10 a.m. in EST, just for the next week. Just for the next week. Yeah, thank you so much for your understanding. And you can also use this time converter. Thank you, Leila and Gubad.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Leila, you can
Yes.
also download the shared notes. Participants put their input from the breakout rooms to the shared notes.
Okay, let me see. Okay, I found it. Okay.
You can download it.
Thanks so much, Leila Hanım. Thanks so much, Hazal Hanım.
Yeah,
You're
thank you.
welcome. Thank you too.
Thank you.
Okay, I found it. And what do I do next? It's now here. I see. So what's next?
There is up, and at the right side, there is a two row.
Two arrows, right?
Yes, two arrows.
Export.
Import, export, yes.
And what do I do with them? Just push them?
When you click on, you can choose the plain text, and it's going to download to your computer.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, it's downloaded on my computer, and then what do I do with that?
I don't know. It's the students' outcomes about the breakout rooms discussions.
Ah.
They already shared in here.
Yeah, but it's just one group.
I think the second group also put some of their...
It's just probably the format is very strange. Okay,
Yes,
it's just dragged, so I have to do something.
I think, yeah.
It's Notepad. It's a Notepad format for some reasons.
Probably, yes.
Okay. Anyway, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For everything. Yeah. So until next week.